Hey, I'm Jan, and what I'm going to show you in this video is 5 things that you need to understand about Google Ads so your business can make more profits, generate more market share, generate more sales revenue, etc., with your online marketing effort. First off, who am I? Right, I'm the managing director and CEO of FurnitureScale.com. And what we do is we help furniture companies generate more sales, profits, revenue through their online marketing efforts. And in the last year alone, for example, we did manage around 12 million euros, 7 million euros in client ad spend. Now, first off, that out of the way, I'm not going to say Google Ads are bad, right? I'm going to be very straight to the point with you. I'm not going to like give you a shiny object or something like that. Basically, we're going to get into the specifics of some pitfalls that can happen with Google Ads that people may be misunderstanding, how to avoid them, how to navigate them, and how to overall get the best results that you can, right? So that out of the way, generally relying on Google Ads may be an issue, right? It's not generally bad to have Google Ads and to be profitable with them. It's obviously good, right? It's making you money. There's no point in turning it off. But at the end of the day, you do have to ensure you aren't relying on it, right? Because unless there's a couple different exceptions, right? I'm going to get into those later. But generally, why is that the case, right? Like, why is it not a good idea to be reliant on your Google Ads and to not have any other traffic channels? Because first off, the reason why that is the case is if you think about what Google Ads do, is they're basically just capturing demand, relatively strong demand at that is already there, right? Like if someone searches for buying, like if someone searches to buy a sofa, they have a pretty strong buying intent, and it's a fraction of the market, right? If you're looking at how frequently people purchase sofas, right? Like there's no official source, but the number seems to be around every 5 to 7 years or something like this. So at the end of the day, looking at all the people you could be reaching and all the people who basically buy their own furniture, the people who want to buy furniture right now, it's a very small subsegment of all the people who you could be reaching and who will be purchasing within the next couple of years, right? And that's basically where the problems do come in because it doesn't really create any demand, right? It just captures it at the end of the day. You're missing around 80 to 90% of the market because you're just not being talked to, right? They're not aware of you, etc., right? And that is kind of already the first point, actually, because yeah, you're just going to miss out on a lot of demand. And the thing with buying behavior, specifically in the furniture industry as well, is people tend to get inspiration from social media platforms, right? For example, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. And that's where a lot of the demand actually is being generated in the first place, right? And where a lot of the purchasing volume is happening. So you're just generally going to be missing out on a lot of potential scale. Another thing is that a competitor with very similar products, right, on Google specifically, can get better scale economies, right? Because they're bigger, because they're not just selling on Google, hypothetically. Let's say they're also selling on Facebook, they're also selling on TikTok, etc., right? They have all these different channels. Of course, they're going to do more volume than you, right? And because they're doing more volume than you, not only can they experiment more with designs, they're also going to be able to get better terms with their suppliers. And because they're getting better terms with their suppliers, they can basically cut down their prices and they can find all these other additional efficiencies that you're not going to be able to find simply because your operation doesn't have the same size as theirs, right? There's not enough leverage in it for you to do these optimizations in that hypothetical scenario. Now, number two is the type of visitor that you're getting, right? Because the type of visitor you're going to be getting is not going to be super, super great. Now, they're going to have very high intent, right? Which is a good thing. If they're searching, they're definitely going to buy somewhere, right? But whether that's from you or someone else, basically comes down to a lot of different variables because these type of consumers, they're gonna be comparing a lot, right? It's a general theme. I'm not saying like everyone who comes from Google Ads is comparing, right? But I'm just generalizing here, right? And the other problem is if your product is very unique, right? People may not even be looking for it in the first place, right? They may just not be searching for it. And unless your product is very cheap or you have just like way more reviews and way more trust symbols than like any other providers, right? And those can be modeled quite easily in general. It's not going to work as well as it could be working, right? Because people are comparing. It's quite big purchasing decision for them, and specifically, if they're on Google, they're just going to be comparing a lot, right? Versus with these other platforms, yes, they may be comparing, right? But the buying motives that they're having are going to be different, right? It's not just going to be price. There's going to be a lot of other different factors that are going to play a role with it, right? And obviously, yeah, you can not really compensate for a your lack of price competitiveness, right? But B also, you can't really reach any customers if you have a very unique product because they're not going to be looking for it, right? And you can't really compensate with any additional marketing efforts that do make what you're doing harder to replicate, right? So for example, there would be A, having better creatives, having better branding, having higher test volume. And on social media, you can do all these things, right? You can be more competitive versus with Google, the amount of things you can do, right? They're pretty limited at the end of the day. And that's just something that again, it's not great because at the end of the day, as soon as something is easy to replicate, right, you are going to wind up having problems with results in the long term because eventually, if you have rational competitors, they're just going to copy what you're doing, or debatable if you call it rational or not, right, depending on how you look at it. But they're basically just going to copy what you're doing, and then they're going to get the same results that you're getting, and they're just going to make everything more competitive for you, but for themselves as well, right? So that's that. And additionally, right, you can't really build a brand as a byproduct, right? So that's probably like the third or the fourth point. And in the long term, that's just a very important mode, right? Because it basically resembles how much trust people have in your solution, how they perceive it, how aware they are of it, etc., etc. And on Google Ads, you can't really have any of this stuff, right? Because people can't really be exposed to your product or your solutions unless they're actually searching for them, right? And now, obviously, there's some problems with that because when it comes down to searching, the brand that you're having is going to play a role, right? So if they already recognize you, they're already aware that you exist, right? It's pretty likely they're going to go with you because you're the safe option, right? Generally, there is a pretty big dynamic going on in the overall e-commerce space, which is called consumer skepticism, right? Because up until I would say last year, it was completely Wild West where people would basically sell products that wouldn't be delivered, etc., etc. Now, obviously, not a good long-term thing, but also for the people who are in it for the long term, who work with integrity with their customers, their overall results are being harmed by this because generally a purchase being made online is being associated with a lot more negative things, right? So that's one bit that plays a role. B is it makes it hard to replicate what you're doing, right? It takes time, it takes budget to be building a brand, and it's not something where someone can come in and like overnight copy exactly what you're doing. Versus with these other things, it is quite possible actually at the end of the day, right? And I'm going to get into some of the examples in a second. But yeah, basically it comes down to the trust people are having, right? How much trust they have in your brand, how much trust they have in your firm, all of these kind of things. And obviously that's playing a role with your buying decision. And yeah, there's also people who like they want it for the status symbol, right? They want to be able to say, hey, I bought this specific brand, right? So there's a couple of different things with it, and it makes it easier for people to compare it, right? It's kind of like mental real estate. If you have a specific place in people's head, right? For example, let's make this up, right? You're the number one provider in France for um, I don't know, for like luxury sofas, or like you have the cheapest sofas in France that still have reasonable quality, just as an example, right? Like a French consumer, if they think about it like this, they're not going to be looking that much for alternatives as well at the same time, right? And they're already aware of it, so it's very, very likely they're not going to be comparing too much. And yeah, there's some benefits you can basically generate from this for yourself. Now, with the other modes that you're having, right? For example, the scale economies that you're having, they're very limited if you only rely on Google, right? Now, scale economies, what are those? First off, right? So basically, scale economies is how good and how efficient you can be with all of your cost items, and generally, there's economies of scale and there's also diseconomies of scale, right? So essentially, what it means is the size of your organization increases, as your revenue increases, etc., there's a lot of cost items that are going down because you can be more efficient with them, right? It makes sense rationally and in terms of leverage to optimize those cost items just because like something, let's say you make like 10 million a month, right? If you can optimize 1% of that, right, and you can get rid of 1% of the cost, right, the difference it's going to make to your bottom line at the end is very high, right? So that's why, like, there's that. And then also diseconomies of scale, right? They do apply, but like your organization has to reach like 500 employees or something like that for that to actually start kicking in, right? In general. Now, the issue with those scale economies is if you're relying on Google in the first place, someone can start advertising similar products to the ones you're having with a similar kind of positioning, with a similar kind of marketing message. And over time, they're actually going to go ahead and outcompete you. Now, why is that the case? Because they're going to be able to outcompete um, your cost, right? Because they can get more economies of scale in the end of the day. So they're going to be more profitable at a higher CPA, and they can afford it more. And that eventually they're just going to kick you out of their ad platform this way. The other thing with Google Ads is it's pretty easy to do at the end of the day, right? And the problem with things being easy to do is eventually in the long term, you're not good to continue doing because there's too much competition, right? So, for example, if you're looking at the content that is great for Google Ads, it's basically just text, right? Or if it's a search ad, it's like a white image and like some reviews, right? But that's pretty much it, right? So it's generally very, very limited in terms of how much of a difference you can make with the marketing efforts. That's part one. But then also two, in terms of how much effort is actually necessary to set up ads and to have attractive ads, right? Whereas if you look at a social network, right, you can have, for example, a video kind of creative that looks very classy, right? It's hard to make, and it's very hard for a competitor to come in and actually model what you're doing there, right? Even if it's an image, even if it's like a different kind of format, it's not that easy, right? Like it's not completely hard, right? But there are certain barriers that do have to be overcome, and someone needs to have a certain level of resources, right? So, for example, with Google Ads as well, another dynamic is there's not really any heavy regulation in terms of um, how to formulate this properly. So there's not any heavy regulation in terms of, for example, preventing drop shipping, preventing a bad user experience, etc., etc. And a lot of the claims people are making on Google Ads, they're not really being fact checked, right? Now with Facebook, people actually get surveyed, right? Hey, how do you rate the experience of buying from this ad, right? And then at the end of the day, if the rating is too bad, you're just going to get shut down, right? So it's a very good thing if you think about it, because A, people don't only have more trust into the platform, but B, they also are going to have less and less of these like false claims being made. They're going to have less and less of these dropshippers being around. And that's a good thing because, again, there's going to be like a real barrier around this kind of business, right? Um, Now, that's that part, right? And overall, if there's more of a barrier in the long term, the results are going to be much better, right? given there's enough time being passed. Now, and all factors being equal. Now, another thing with Google Ads, and this is kind of the last thing I want to get into, is that the performance of branded search campaigns in general shouldn't be taken very serious. And the reason why that is the case is because those, like Google Ads in general, they just capture demand that's already there, right? But branded search ads specifically, what happens with those is they're capturing demand that's already there for your brand, right? Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be running them, because you are going to have to compete on your own keywords, own quote unquote, right? Because Google owns the platform, against other competitors who are offering similar solutions to yours and who are going to be directly bidding on your keywords, right? And that just overall leads to a bunch of different problems, right? So that's that. Now, um, generally, the recommendation I would make for this is to not take the results of these campaigns too serious, right? Generally, we do recommend to apply a certain percentage to our clients for that specific campaign type. So the results can be looked at somewhat realistically, because A, the demand wouldn't be there unless there would be other advertising efforts being made, right? There wouldn't be any demand for the brand in the first place. That's piece one. But then piece two is a lot of these people, they would buy anyways, right? So yeah, a lot of different ideas. And if you're interested in implementing all of these or just some of these ideas in your business, you can basically head over to furniturescale.com and book a free call where we're going to assess your needs, and we're going to give you kind of like the step-by-step plan of things that you can implement in order to take your business to the next level. So yeah, head over there, book a call, and yeah, see you in another video, hopefully. Bye bye.